My guest today fought as a U.S. Marine in the Gulf War, but is now going to Iraq for a very different reason. His plan to lead a group of anti-war protesters and offer himself as a human shield in the event that an attack takes place. Is he an idealist or just a willing tool for Iraqi propaganda? Kenneth O'Keefe, a very warm welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Why don't you go to Iraq and tell Saddam that he can avoid war simply by cooperating with the United Nations?
Well, I think the United Nations has already dishonored itself. You remember back last July, the United Nations Security Council voted unanimously to provide immunity to the United States. There's 5 nations that have veto powers.
Why has it dishonored itself in the case of Iraq?
Well, I don't trust the United Nations to begin with, and they've dishonored themselves by saying that they would give immunity to the United States. So I don't really care what the United Nations says. I don't really care if they give a resolution endorsing war.
So you have no interest in what the world community and the 200 or so nations that make up the United Nations actually say?
Is the United Nations the world community? As far as I can tell, the vast majority of people on this planet stand directly opposed to this war. I don't believe the United Nations represents the world community.
Certainly represents a lot of the elected governments.
I don't believe the government of England is representing the majority of the people in England. I don't believe that the government of the United States is representing the majority there either.
You say most people against the war. The opinion polls aren't that simple. The latest opinion polls show division, but January the 19th, the latest poll in Britain, those who approve or don't know about a war amount to 53% of the population. That's not the majority against the war, is it? You can shrug, but it's not the majority.
I question that. I mean, I've just
Why?
heard that.
Because it doesn't tally with your own ideas.
No, not at all. How do you get 400,000 people out in the streets in London, 1 million in Florence, Italy, protests around the world? I think it's quite obvious that the vast majority of people do not support this war. And I don't think any logical thinking person would believe that the world will be a better place if U.S. bombs are dropped on an already thoroughly victimized people. I think that's an insult to our intelligence to believe that that would make the world a better place.
You can say that, but again, the figures don't back you up. It's easy to say that, but you haven't got the figures on your side.
You don't believe that the majority of people are against this war?
The governments say they're against the war. They say it's a last resort. They don't want to go to war unless it's a last resort.
Do you really believe
Each of the governments have said that.
Do you really?
Doesn't matter what I believe.
Well, I don't believe.
It's a matter of what the people out there believe.
Well, what's being said and what's really intended to be done are two different things, in my opinion. The United States intends to carry out this war because they need to dominate the world by having the oil reserves. And by controlling the second largest oil reserves, they will basically have veto power over the world by controlling the means of production through the control of the oil.
So you don't think it's worth saying to Saddam Hussein, why not cooperate?
Now, well, Saddam Hussein...
The world has waited 12 years, during which time you've built up your arms again. You're skeptical about that too.
Well, they can't find them. Where are they? I mean, where are they?
The UN inspectors say we feel the declaration by Iraq to the UN has not answered a great many questions of the past. They haven't had long, have they? They've only had a few weeks there.
What's the point of even having inspectors going in if Saddam is supposed to produce proof that he has nothing? How do you prove you have nothing? If the UN inspectors have a real job, then their job is to go in and find these weapons. They can't find them.
You say he's already disarmed from what we can tell. How do you know? How do you know?
Well, if he has anything, it's minuscule.
But how do you know? You make these glib statements which have no basis in fact. How do you know he's disarmed?
Well, we can't find him. Why do we have inspectors going in there?
Well, for 4 years we didn't have any inspectors in. They've only been in for a few weeks. It's a country of 177,000 square miles. It might take a bit of time.
Well, why even send in inspectors then? Why don't we just go ahead and drop the bombs and get it over with?
Isn't the point is that the Western governments know exactly what Saddam Hussein has, because, as you've been telling the rest of the world, they gave it to him in the first place.
There's no doubt
so they
about
do
that.
know. They do know what he's got.
Well,
so when they say he's got it, they're speaking from experience.
Is that not a major irony that they were the ones that gave him to him? And
that's
when
neither here nor there. They know what he's got. You're saying he's disarmed. They know what he's got.
I really kind of resent this focus on others instead of focusing on the crimes of our own governments. Since our governments produced these weapons and provided them to these sadistic tyrants around the world, including Suharto or Pinochet or a long list of people like that, isn't it more important that we focus on what our governments have been doing instead of pointing the finger elsewhere, which we have little control over? I really resent this. The U.S. and Britain are criminal for having supplied these weapons and continuing that favored nation trading partner status after he committed his worst crime. So I would point the finger at ourselves first. Then we have a legitimate right to look at Saddam and the crimes that he's committing. But until then, we're hypocrites.
And Saddam isn't criminal to have used those weapons?
He is. Of course he is. But I do not have control over what Saddam does. But if we live in so-called democracies, then we are supposed to have true representation. And we do not, because the majority of people do not want to support vicious, nasty tyrants who are killing people. But what it does do for our governments, who again I do not believe represent us, is ensure that the flow of resources will continue to be plundered from the rest of the world back into the West, into the filthy rich hands of people who want to see this kind of tyranny continue.
Peace depends on two sides in a dispute, doesn't it? And you only seem to be addressing one.
No, not at all. The Iraqi people, the last thing they need is for bombs to be dropped on them. I'm going down there. People can read into it whatever they want. But the fact is that I simply cannot stand by and watch another atrocity be committed on behalf of the West that I come from. It sickens me and it saddens me. And I would much rather sit down there with the Iraqi people, perhaps hug each other, look into each other's eyes, express our humanity, and if the bombs need to drop, then let the world watch that. And if that's the way they feel about it and that's what they want, well, then shame on all of us for allowing it.
You haven't worried so much about the Iraqi people and the plight they've been in for the last 12 years,
I wish I had done more. I wish I had done more. You're right.
When they were under repression and humiliation by their own regime,
that's right.
Torture, execution. You haven't worried about that very much.
No, I've definitely worried about it, but I have not done as much as I could have.
Why not?
I'm trying to make
Why
up.
not? Why not?
Because I'm a human being, and I'm also subject to the same pressures and the same desires of any human being. I wish I could have done more. Now I'm trying to make up for it. If we want to look at what I couldn't have done, shouldn't we focus on the things that I can do now instead of what I haven't done in the past? And I have worked on issues dealing with human rights and other issues relating to the Iraqi situation. But I'm one person, and I cannot save the world, and I've never claimed to save the world, but I can do the best that I can do. And I hope that people will see that they can do more as well.
Isn't what you're actually doing assisting in a process which could allow this frightful regime to last a little longer? What help is that to the Iraqis which you profess to care so much about?
Well, if you look at the protests that are going on in Iraq right now, they're against
government-sponsored
I don't believe that.
You don't believe that people are free to protest in Iraq,
I don't believe that all of the. I don't believe that these are all people who are being forced into protesting against the U.S. I believe that these people in Iraq.
How many anti-government demonstrations do you see in Iraq?
Many of them, most of them hate Saddam, but they hate America even more.
Mr. O'Keefe, how many anti-government demonstrations do you see in Iraq?
How many anti-government demonstrations? They don't exist.
No, they don't exist.
You and I both know that.
Exactly.
You and I both know that.
Exactly. So the demonstrations.
But are you saying that means that there's no legitimacy to anti-U.S. protests over there? Are you saying that these people don't feel that way?
It does cut the credibility a little, doesn't it?
Well,
when you can only demonstrate one way.
Slightly, but I think even you will acknowledge that they definitely do not like the United States over there.
You say Saddam isn't stupid.
I don't think he's stupid. He
wasn't that clever to go into the Gulf War in the first place.
Well, he got suckered into that now, didn't he? Because you know that the high-level U.S. diplomat, forget his name, her name, went in there the day before they invaded Kuwait.
One U.S. diplomat
went in and
told him invading a whole country.
No. They went in there the day before he invaded and said that this was a regional issue, that Kuwait was not a protectorate, basically gave him the green light. Now, remember, he was a favored
There's a lot of dispute over that. That's one version of it, and you know there are plenty of other versions of it.
Noam Chomsky's documented that amongst other people, and I trust
Noam
their
Chomsky has a particular view to push, doesn't he?
What view is that? This man is a true American. He cares about America and is exposing the crimes of America. I think that's being a patriot. I don't think he has an agenda.
Isn't it one-sided just to expose the crimes of just one country? And again, you know, there are two sides in this dispute. You don't seem to want to address the crimes that Saddam has carried out.
I have a responsibility to look at the actions of the government in which I came from and was a part of and paid taxes to. I'm not saying ignore the others around the world that are committing crimes. Of course not. But don't we have a greater obligation to the nations from which we come? I think we do.
12 years ago, Mr. O'Keefe, you went off happily to war in the Gulf as a loyal, patriotic U.S. Marine. Was it right to liberate Kuwait then from Iraqi invasion?
Well, actually, I believe in international law. I very much do, and I believe that people, small nations, should be protected from larger nations. In fact, I come from Hawaii. If we look at the history of Hawaii, the United States had conspired to overthrow the legitimate and lawful government. In fact, if you look
Iraq was wrong.
United States Public Law 103-150 clearly states that the Americans stole the Hawaiian nation and the Hawaiian people never gave it up.
We're talking about Iraq.
But how is it possible that we talk about Kuwait?
How did we get from Iraq to Hawaii?
Because I believe in international law.
Okay, but I'm asking you about a specific example.
If law is applied arbitrarily and it's applied unevenly, then it's not law at all. It's the color of law.
So was it lawful?
Now, if law is to be applied in favor of the Kuwaiti government at the expense of the Iraqis, because they're victimized by the Iraqis, then the Hawaiian nation needs to be honored as well against the brutal and oppressive policies of the United States and Hawaii.
Can we get back